It is one of those perfect mornings in the Arizona desert, the kind that makes you feel alive. The sun is just beginning to climb above the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the saguaro. Cacti. Birds dart through the crisp morning air, and the trails of Phoenix hum quietly with the footsteps of early hikers. You can almost feel the warmth on your skin, smell the earthy scent of the desert ground baking under the sun. But what if I told you that somewhere along one of those quiet trails, hidden by tangled brush and barbed wire, a young woman's life was about to be stolen in the most brutal way imaginable? What if I told you that the very place she sought peace and happiness would become the site of a crime so disturbing that even hardened detectives would be shaken to their core? This is not just another true crime story. This is a story about trust, about the terrifying fragility of life, and about a community torn apart by the sudden, senseless loss of someone they loved. This is the story of Lauren Heike, a 29-year-old woman whose bright spirit touched everyone who knew her. Until one April morning, it was extinguished in an act of violence that made no sense. Lauren's case would send shockwaves across Phoenix. It would launch one of the city's largest manhunts in recent memory. It would leave a family heartbroken, a community frightened, and an entire nation asking, how could this happen here? And perhaps the most haunting part, there were clues. Pieces of the puzzle scattered like breadcrumbs along the trail. And as detectives raced against time, every single one of those pieces would matter. Before we dive into that tragic morning, we need to know who Lauren was. Because she was not just a name in a headline or a face on a missing person flyer. She was a daughter, a friend, a coworker, the kind of person who made people feel seen and valued. Lauren had grown up in Kitsap County, Washington, surrounded by the evergreen beauty of the Pacific Northwest. Friends described her as someone who brought sunshine everywhere she went. She was funny, outgoing, and had a kindness that made people feel instantly comfortable. By 2023, Lauren had built a life in Phoenix, Arizona, where she worked as an esthetician. She loved helping people feel their best, and had a knack for making clients feel like they were chatting with an old friend. She had just moved into a new apartment near the Reach 11 Trail, a sprawling desert path she loved for its peace and natural beauty. Hiking there became part of her routine. It was her sanctuary, a place to reset. Her close friend, River Hubble, said they spoke almost every morning. It was their ritual, a quick call, a few words about gratitude and plans for the day. April 28th, 2023 started the same way. Lauren called River around 10 a.m. They laughed. They shared the little joys of life, the kind of conversation you have when you assume there will always be another one. But for River, those words would become unforgettable. They were the last time he would ever hear Lauren's voice. That Friday morning was nothing out of the ordinary. Phoenix was bustling with life. Hikers, dog walkers, and cyclists filled the Reach 11 Trail, taking in the warm breeze. Lauren slipped into her usual workout clothes, comfortable black leggings, a sports bra, and her favorite pair of running shoes. She grabbed a coffee, the simple morning pleasure she cherished, and headed out for a hike. She knew the trail well. It was practically in her backyard, and like so many other mornings, she walked it alone, trusting the familiar path. But this time, she would not come back. By mid-afternoon, friends and coworkers started to worry. Lauren was not answering calls. She had not shown up for work. This was not like her. She was responsible, dependable, and never just disappeared. River kept calling, but each ring went unanswered, each text unread. That gnawing sense of dread began to grow. Hours passed. Darkness fell. And somewhere along that trail, something terrible had happened. The next morning, April 29th, was just as sunny as the day before. The desert was alive with birdsong, completely indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded there. A woman from a nearby neighborhood decided to take her dog out for a walk. She had walked the Reach 11 Trail countless times before. It was routine. But as she rounded a bend near Libby Street, something caught her eye. At first, it looked like a pile of clothes tangled in the bushes, partially hidden by the dense undergrowth. But as she stepped closer, the horrifying reality set in. It was not clothes, it was a body. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The desert was suddenly silent. She reached for her phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. What you are about to hear is hard to forget. Phoenix 911, where is your emergency? I just found a woman's body out in the desert. The caller's voice shook with fear. "I was just going for a walk and hostess. She is there. I did not touch her. I did not feel safe." But it looks like she has been there for a while. The dispatcher asked her questions, her location, whether she could tell if the woman was breathing. "No," she whispered. "She is not moving. There is blood coming from under her sports bra. I think she is dead." The call lasted nearly 5 minutes. Every word dripped with disbelief. By 10:30 a.m., Phoenix police had descended on the scene. At first, officers thought they might be responding to a hiker who had collapsed from heat or injury. That was not unusual in the desert. But the moment they reached Lauren's body, they knew this was different. She had been brutally attacked. Her body was hidden from the main trail, almost as if the killer wanted her to be found later, or maybe not at all. There were signs of a struggle: torn clothing, personal items scattered in the brush, and a shoe lying near a barbed wire fence. This was no accident. This was a murder. The news spread quickly. A young woman attacked and killed on a popular hiking trail in broad daylight, within view of expensive homes and a bustling community. It did not make sense. The Reach 11 trail was not isolated. It was well-trafficked and felt safe. People who lived nearby described waving to Lauren as she hiked. Now, those same neighbors were placing flowers at the spot where her body had been found. The fear was palpable. Parents kept their children indoors. Hikers avoided the trails. And rumors began to swirl. Who could have done something so horrific and why? But investigators were already piecing together the first critical clues. The detectives at the scene knew they were dealing with a killer who did not want to be caught. Whoever attacked Lauren had chosen a spot that was just far enough from the main trail to avoid being seen, but the killer had left something behind. One of Lauren's shoes, found tangled near the barbed wire fence, would soon become the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case. And the DNA found on that shoe would crack the investigation wide open. The crime scene at Reach 11 Trail was chaotic, but every investigator on site knew they had to be meticulous. There was no room for mistakes. The brutality of Lauren's murder left even seasoned detectives shaken, yet they moved with quiet determination, combing through the rocky ground, scanning every cactus thicket, every scrap of disturbed earth for clues. Lauren's body was respectfully removed from the scene, but evidence technicians stayed behind for hours. They found pieces of clothing torn from her body, a shoe wedged near a barbed wire fence, and signs of a violent struggle. Broken branches and footprints painted a grim picture. Lauren had fought for her life. Whoever attacked her had been relentless. Detective James Hester, a veteran with the Phoenix Police Department, later described the scene as one of the most haunting he had worked in years. "You could feel it," he said. "You could feel the violence that had taken place here. Whoever did this did not care about being seen. They did not care about the brutality of what they were doing." Among all the evidence, the single running shoe found near the fence stood out. Investigators carefully bagged it, knowing instinctively that it could hold the key. If the killer had grabbed Lauren, dragged her, or even kicked at the shoe, there was a good chance they had left something behind: skin cells, sweat, maybe even a drop of blood. The forensic lab moved quickly. DNA extraction could take weeks, but in high-profile cases like this, everything was expedited. Still, detectives could not afford to just wait. They had to keep digging. As news of the murder spread, calls began to pour into the Phoenix police tip line. Hikers who frequented the Reach 11 trail remembered seeing someone suspicious in the days before and after Lauren's death. Several callers described a young man, tall and thin, wearing dark clothing and carrying a backpack. He did not look like a normal hiker. He did not smile or nod like most people on the trail. He just lurked. One woman told detectives she saw him standing off to the side of the path, half hidden behind a tree, watching people go by. Another caller, a man who jogged the trail every morning, said the stranger gave him a cold, predatory stare as he passed. It was like he was sizing people up, the jogger explained. Like he was waiting for the right person. These accounts were chilling. Could this have been Lauren's killer? On May 2, 2023, detectives obtained security footage from a camera near the Reach 11 trail. The grainy black and white video showed a man running through the desert around the same time Lauren disappeared. He was not jogging for exercise. He was sprinting, his backpack bouncing violently against his shoulders as he bolted through the rough terrain. Detectives froze the frame, studying every detail. The man's height His build, the clothing, everything matched the descriptions from witnesses. They released the footage to the public, hoping someone would recognize him. And it worked. Within 24 hours, tips flooded in. One caller said the man looked like someone they knew from a fast food restaurant nearby. Another tipster mentioned he lived close to the trail and had a history of odd, aggressive behavior. The pieces were starting to fit. While the tips were coming in, the lab called detectives with the results of the DNA test from Lauren's shoe. It was a match, but not to Lauren. The sample belonged to a 22-year-old man already in the criminal database. His name was Zion William Teasley, and his file was unsettling. He had been arrested for armed robbery at just 17 years old. Instead of prison, he had been given probation, a chance to turn his life around. But that chance had apparently been wasted. There were other disturbing reports, too. Former co-workers said he had violent outbursts, particularly toward women. When detectives compared his physical description to the man in the surveillance footage, it was a perfect match. Now they had a name, a face, and a location. Zion Teasley lived less than a mile from the Reach 11 trail, in a small apartment that backed up to the desert. Detectives began round-the-clock surveillance. They watched him leave for short walks, always with that same backpack. They watched him pace his apartment balcony late at night. They did not want to move too soon. They needed to be sure they had enough evidence to hold him. But then they discovered something that forced their hand. Zion had booked a plane ticket. He was scheduled to leave Phoenix for Detroit on May 5th, 2023. If he got on that plane, there was a real chance they would lose him forever. Detectives called an emergency briefing. They decided to make the arrest that night. May 4th, 2023, 30 pages M. Phoenix police officers in tactical gear surrounded Zion's apartment building. Body camera footage later released shows them pounding on the door, their voices echoing through the hallway. Phoenix police opened the door. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open, and Zion stepped out, his hands raised. The officers moved quickly, handcuffing him without resistance. The entire operation took less than 10 minutes. Inside the apartment, detectives found items they believed connected him to the murder. Clothing matching the surveillance footage, a small knife that could have caused Lauren's injuries, and other evidence that would later be presented at trial. When Zion was brought into the interrogation room, detectives tried to question him. At first, he denied everything. He claimed he had not even been on the trail that day. But when they confronted him with the DNA evidence and the surveillance video, he shut down completely. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office charged Zion Teasley with first-degree murder, robbery, tampering with evidence. This was not just a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The evidence was overwhelming. His DNA on Lauren's shoe, the surveillance footage, witness accounts, and his proximity to the crime scene. But as prosecutors prepared for trial, one thing became painfully clear. This was not Zion's first violent offense. And if the justice system had handled his previous crimes differently, Lauren might still be alive. By the time of the arrest, the Phoenix community had been living in fear for nearly a week. Residents left flowers and handwritten notes at the site where Lauren's body had been found. Friends and family held vigils, remembering the light she had brought into their lives. Lauren's parents, Jeff and Lana, appeared at a press conference alongside detectives. Lana's voice broke as she said, "She was my little girl. I can't believe she is gone." The pain was unbearable, and though an arrest had been made, there was no bringing Lauren back. While Zion sat in jail, prosecutors discovered even more about his past crimes that painted a terrifying picture of a man who had been spiraling for years. And as the trial date approached, the stakes would rise even higher. The arrest of Zion William Teasley brought a wave of relief to Phoenix, but it also sparked a deeper, more troubling question: how had this young man been free to walk the streets at all? Because as prosecutors dug into his past, what they uncovered was chilling. Zion Teasley was only 22 years old when he was arrested for the murder of Lauren Heike, but his criminal record stretched back years, and it revealed a disturbing pattern of violence. At just 17, he had been arrested for armed robbery. In 2018, he and two accomplices held up a fast food restaurant, pointing a gun at terrified employees. Instead of serving prison time, Zion struck a plea deal and was given probation. It was a chance to start over, but he did not take it. There were other incidents too, the kind that often slip under the radar until it is too late. Former co-workers described him as unpredictable and volatile. One restaurant manager told police that Zion had to be fired after he physically assaulted a female co-worker during an argument. It was not just anger, the manager said. It was the way he looked at people, like he had no empathy. It was unsettling. At one point, Zion had attempted to join the U.S. Marine Corps. On paper, it looked like he was trying to turn his life around. But the attempt did not last. Marine Corps records showed he had been discharged during boot camp in 2019. Officials would not say exactly why, citing privacy laws, but the message was clear. Zion had failed to complete even the most basic training. Instead of finding direction, he drifted. He picked up short-term jobs at fast food chains and retail stores, but he never stayed anywhere for long. And those who worked with him remembered the same things: anger, instability, and a simmering resentment toward the world. In December 2023, Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell made a bombshell announcement. If convicted, prosecutors would seek the death penalty for Zion Teasley. This was not a decision made lightly. Seeking capital punishment meant the case would become even more complex, and the trial would almost certainly be delayed. But prosecutors believed the brutality of the crime warranted the harshest possible sentence. Lauren's family supported the decision. "We want justice for our daughter," Jeff and Lauren Heike said in a statement. "We will be there every step of the way to make sure Lauren's voice is heard." As prosecutors prepared for trial, other allegations began to surface. In July 2024, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office filed additional charges against Zion connected to a 2020 assault and burglary case. That attack, like Lauren's murder, involved a knife and a young female victim. Then, in February 2025, news outlets reported that he was facing 10 counts of misconduct with minors related to incidents dating back to 2019 and 2020. Court records alleged that Zion had sent explicit messages and material to underage teens during that period. Most of these charges were later dropped, but they painted a disturbing picture. Zion was not just a man who had snapped in a moment of rage. He was a predator who had been spiraling out of control for years. The trial was eventually scheduled for October 28, 2025 in Maricopa County Superior Court. It had already been postponed several times due to the complexity of the case. Death penalty cases require extraordinary preparation. Every piece of evidence would be scrutinized, every witness carefully vetted. For Lauren's family, the delays were agonizing. They had already lived through 2 Christmases without their daughter, and now they faced the prospect of waiting another year for justice. But they refused to give up. Jeff and Lauren Heike became outspoken advocates for their daughter. They attended every hearing, no matter how brief. They spoke to reporters, keeping Lauren's name in the headlines. "We do not want people to forget her," Lana said during an interview with Arizona Voice for Crime Victims. "She was not just a victim. She was a beautiful person with dreams and a future, and we are going to fight for her until the very end." At vigils, they thanked the Phoenix Police Department for their tireless work. They thanked the community for its support. But they also made it clear, the fight was not over. As the trial approached, both sides prepared for battle. Prosecutors had DNA evidence, surveillance footage, and multiple witnesses placing Zion near the crime scene. They also had a compelling narrative, a repeat offender who had escalated from robbery to murder. But Zion's defense team was equally determined. They would challenge the DNA evidence, question the reliability of witnesses, and argue that the prosecution could not prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt. For Lauren's loved ones, the waiting was the hardest part. Each court date felt like another wound. Each delay meant another reminder of the life that had been stolen. And even though an arrest had been made, the community's fear had not entirely faded. Because the truth was as stark as the desert landscape where Lauren's body had been found. Evil can hide in plain sight. Lauren's case raised difficult questions about the criminal justice system. How had someone with Zion's history been allowed to walk free? Could stricter supervision have prevented this? Advocates began pushing for changes in how probation is handled for violent offenders. Some called for better tracking of individuals who show repeated patterns of aggression. Others argued that rehabilitation efforts needed to be more intensive and better funded. But for Lauren's family, these debates were bittersweet. They could not change the past. All they could do was hope for a future where no one else would have to experience their pain. The trial will be one of the most closely watched cases in Arizona in years. If convicted, Zion Teasley could face the death penalty, a rare outcome in the state. But regardless of the verdict, one thing is clear. Lauren's story has already left a permanent mark. She was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a woman who deserved to grow old and chase her dreams. And though she was taken far too soon, her memory continues to inspire those who knew her and those who have only come to know her through this story. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was buzzing long before the trial began. On the morning of October 28, 2025, media crews lined the steps, cameras flashing as family members. Prosecutors and defense attorneys made their way inside. This was the day Lauren Heineke's family had been waiting for. After 2.5 agonizing years, the man accused of her brutal murder would finally face a jury. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Prosecutor Rachel Mitchell stepped up to deliver her opening statement. Her voice was firm, steady, and unwavering as she recounted Lauren's final morning. She described how Lauren had set out on a peaceful hike, how she had been stalked and attacked, and how she had fought for her life. This was not random, Mitchell told the jury. This was an ambush. The evidence will show that the defendant, Zion Teasley, knew exactly what he was doing. He left DNA on Lauren's shoe as he dragged her into the bushes. He left behind surveillance footage of himself fleeing the scene. And he left behind a trail of fear that this community will never forget. When it was the defense attorney's turn, the tone shifted. They argued that the state's case was circumstantial, that the DNA could have been transferred accidentally, and that the surveillance footage was too grainy to be conclusive. You will see that there are holes in the prosecution's story, the defense said. And when there is doubt, you must find the defendant not guilty. The prosecution methodically presented its case over the next several days. DNA evidence. A forensic expert testified that the DNA found on Lauren's shoe was a 1 in 1 trillion match to Zion Teasley. This is not a coincidence, the expert said. It is scientifically impossible for this DNA to belong to anyone else. Surveillance footage. Jurors watched the grainy video of a man sprinting through the desert with a backpack. Several witnesses who knew Zion identified him as the man in the video. Witness testimony, hikers who had seen Zion lurking near the trail in the days leading up to Lauren's murder, took the stand. One described the way he had stared at her, like I was prey. Behavioral patterns. The prosecution also called former co-workers who testified about Zion's violent outbursts and his history of intimidating women. The defense tried to chip away at each piece of evidence, questioning the reliability of witness memories and the possibility of contamination at the crime scene. But the overall picture painted by the prosecution was clear and damning. One of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Lauren's parents, Jeff and Lana, were called to testify about their daughter. Lana's voice broke as she described the morning she learned Lauren was missing. Jeff held back tears as he recounted the police officer's knock on the door, the words no parent ever wants to hear. She was our light, Jeff said softly. She loved life. She loved the simple things, walking her dog, drinking her coffee, calling her friends just to say hi. And now, all of that is gone because of one person's choices. The courtroom was silent. Even the jurors seemed moved. After nearly 3 weeks of testimony, the jury was sent to deliberate. The wait was excruciating. Jeff and Lana sat side by side in the courtroom, holding hands, praying for justice. After less than a day, the jury returned. The 4 persons stood, holding the verdict form. We, the jury, find the defendant, Zion William Teasley, guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps filled the room. Lana buried her face in Jeff's shoulder, sobbing quietly. Zion sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. The judge thanked the jurors for their service and dismissed them. Sentencing would be held the following month. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecution once again asked for the death penalty. They argued that Zion's actions were deliberate, calculated, and unimaginably cruel. The defense pleaded for mercy, citing Zion's troubled upbringing and the possibility of rehabilitation. But the judge was unmoved. Mr. Teasley, the judge said, you showed no mercy to Lauren Heike. You ended the life of a young woman who deserved to grow old, who deserved happiness, who deserved safety. For that, you will face the ultimate penalty. Zion was sentenced to death. The sentence brought a measure of closure to Lauren's family, but it could never erase the pain of losing her. Outside the courthouse, Lana spoke through tears. We miss her every single day, she said. But we know justice was done. and we hope no other family ever has to go through what we have been through. The Phoenix community rallied around the Heike family. Vigils were held in Lauren's honor. The Reach 11 Trail, once a place of fear, became a place of remembrance. Friends and strangers alike left flowers and painted rocks with messages of love. Lauren's murder changed Phoenix. It reminded people how quickly life can be taken away, how violence can strike even in the most familiar places. But it also brought out the best in people. Neighbors who barely knew each other before began walking the trails together. Local businesses raised money for victim advocacy groups. And most importantly, Lauren's story sparked conversations about how to keep others safe. There are a few lessons we can take from this tragedy. Always trust your instincts. If someone or something feels off, take it seriously. Hike with others when possible. Safety in numbers is not just a cliche, it can save lives. Push for accountability in the justice system. Violent offenders should not slip through the cracks. Lauren's family has made it their mission to honor her memory by advocating for these changes. If we can save even one life, Jeff said, then Lauren's death won't have been in vain. As we close this story, we are left with the image of Lauren walking the Reach 11 Trail that morning, coffee in hand, smiling at the simple beauty of life. She could not have known what was coming. None of us ever do, but we can honor her by living with the same kindness and gratitude she carried every day. So the next time you are out on a trail or sitting quietly with your morning coffee, take a moment to think of Lauren Heike, because remembering her is not just about the tragedy of her death. It is about the light she brought into the world, the light that still shines through the people who loved her. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and never forget